Picture your 98-year-old dad on a telehealth call. The cardiologist cheerfully reports your pacemaker battery looks good for another 7 years. Dad leans in and deadpans. Great. What's the plan after that? Park that zinger in your back pocket. We'll tie a ribbon on it before the credits roll. Today I'm chatting with Howard Miller, bestselling author of Burdens and Blessing, a lighter-hearted approach for middle-aged folks dealing with aging parents, and the man who wrangled over 350 Word docs of doctor notes, pill schedules, and in case of emergency plans while caring for his aging parents, yet somehow kept everyone laughing. If you're balancing Zoom meetings, teen drama, and a dad who insists he doesn't fall, he stumbles, stick around. Howard's dropping a simple, lighthearted question that melts stress in 30 seconds. A sibling peace move that saved his family's sanity. Why finding one tiny laugh each day can turn caregiving from burnout to blessing. And yes, we'll revisit the pacemaker punchline to reveal the bigger lesson hidden inside it. Howard Miller, welcome to Create the Best Me. This is an honor and a privilege to have you on the show.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Carmen.
Howard, before we get into today's conversation, which is a conversation that I am passionate about because I feel like it's something we all need to talk about and we don't talk about. Can you please tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about who Howard Miller is?
Sure. Thank you, Carmen. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Howard Miller, as Carmen said, and I'm originally from New York. I live in the Bay Area, just down the road from Carmen. I have been on my own as a business person since 2000 or something. I started as a business life coach. My passion is being in front of people. I've taught management, leadership skills. I then opened up a bookkeeping business, which you'd be surprised, the connection, because you really need communications for that. And so I was doing management training and bookkeeping for quite a while. And then I'd say the last 10 years or so, my life changed a bit. I was still doing that, but caring for my parents with my brother, and we of course had help, but that kind of changed a lot of my focus. So I then wrote a book, which I'm sure we'll talk about here, and about my experience with that, and had a lot of levity in there. And that's the subject here, combining that with my other skills. And that's what I'm looking at right now. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. So, Howard, what inspired you to write this amazing book called Burden and Blessings?
Burdens and Blessings. And the subtitle is A Lighter-Hearted Approach for Middle-Aged Folks Dealing with Aging Parents. So, Carmen, the reason I wrote it, the first reason I wrote it was one of the ways for me to help process my grief. It was cathartic. So I was very lucky. My parents were not sick. They didn't have cancer. They just got older. Dad lived to 99 with his mental state. He was intact. Mom lived to 92. And I just got to see them get old. And my life, I'm pretty independent, but I had a lot of responsibilities. And I knew I took like over 350 Word documents associated with them on doctors and assisted living places that they never went to, and medications, and my thoughts in there too, because obviously there was a lot of stress. So I wrote it for me initially. What I realized is what I went through, other people can touch on, and it could help others. So I really felt complete after writing it. When my brother read it and said our parents would be proud, I was like, okay, that's the only review I need. But then I thought it could help others. Also, if I could have levity, because remember the subtitle is A Lighter-Hearted Approach. If I could have levity, and there's humor in the book, if I could have levity on losing my parents, not, how they went, but just about the experience, where can anyone else have levity? How will that help them create their best selves? And where can you do that at work? And if companies, where does that help the bottom line? So it incorporates everything that I've done. So there's a lot of different inspirations on why I wrote it and why I'm continuing to promote it.
And it is a much needed book for all of us because anybody who is in that sandwich generation, midlife generation, we might end up having to take care of our parents and juggle our jobs and our own personal lives, our own personal health. Tell me, how does someone find balance?
So I'd say more and more people have to, okay. And I was about to say have to, and I was told so many times you're a good son, and I didn't like that. I was a dutiful son because I did what I knew needed to be done. It's the right thing. And first, you don't even realize you're out of balance for a while, right? It's not like, boom, it changes overnight. It just starts slowly where you're becoming more the parent, more the supervisor, or managing. Again, I was lucky in that they had each other for a while and we had help come in, but it's like monitoring the help. It can be very challenging to keep a balance. And the thing I'd like to comment on that is, have you had balance before? Because some people never were in any kind of balance. They work too much. So you start the habits before you have these kind of issues. And the way I look at it is if I didn't go to the gym or if I didn't stretch or do something for me, I'm not as useful to them. And part of it is accepting that some of my downtime just wasn't going to be downtime, right? Because I had this responsibility, which I knew would end eventually, right? I didn't know when. And I wasn't like hoping it would end, but I wish I had one answer for you, but it is just some part of it is acceptance and starting those habits sooner than later.
Because a lot of times we're unhealthy. We're unhealthy because, like you said, maybe we're not going to the gym before this happens. Maybe we're not eating right before this happens. Maybe we are workhorses to where we're all work, and no play. And so we are out of balance.
Right. And then when this happens, you have to add this to the seesaw, whatever you want to call it, and you're really out of balance. This is stressful. I have a friend, a tennis buddy, and his dad was around the same age as my dad, but he was estranged from his dad. And I said, so when your dad passes, will you have any regrets? And he, no, not really. And Carmen, I was slightly jealous of him because in some ways he didn't have to take on. I'm kind of teasing. I wasn't jealous. I'm glad I had a very close relationship with both my parents. But he didn't have to take on the burdens. Right? Remember, burdens and blessings. And so there's a lot of stress with the burdens. They come hand in hand with the blessings. When you look at all of that reflection, there's a balance there. But while you're going through it, sometimes there isn't. But then you do have moments where there is, if you try.
Tell me, how important is, because you talk about levity, how important is incorporating levity in order to be able to see the blessing?
So one thing, first, defining levity is not necessarily having to be funny. Some people aren't funny. Some people, I grew up in a house of humor. There was a book in the house called Laughter is the Best Medicine. So we always had humor. We always went to humor, which I think is one of the best gifts I've ever had. Not everyone has that, and that's fine. Levity is just getting lighter about something. And that could be as straightforward as changing your perspective. So if you're looking at something and you change it differently, and part of that is the way that we talk to each other. What's fascinating, Carmen, is when I teach management and leaders skills, one of them is how to ask questions. And I realize that helps with levity because what's the most common word when we ask someone a question? We begin with the word why a lot, but you shouldn't begin with why because why puts people on the defensive. So if you begin with what or how, those are much better. And even when you're doing self-talk, try to use that in a situation. It might help for the moments. I knew I was very grateful. You try to ask yourself, what are you grateful for today? Come up with something. But there will be times when you're not. fortunately have a good relationship with my brother. But you take this situation, add on top of it during the pandemic. I think it was about a month we didn't talk. I mean, I have a chapter in the book. I joke, we cursed at each other more than in a Quentin Tarantino movie. We cursed more than an episode of Succession. It was because we both cared and we both came about it a little bit differently. So that was hard. But here's levity on that one. They were staying with my parents because no one knew what was going on in the pandemic, right? He thought having them in his house that would keep them safe. But he was working full time, wasn't going to work. And I needed to go from San Francisco to LA. Anyway, I finally get them back to their house. And my mother said to my father, I heard them, I was in the other room. She said to him, I don't think the boys, they called us the boys, I don't think the boys are talking to each other. And he said, I might as well be dead. And I walked out of the room and said, don't you dare die. He'll blame me for that too. There's levity right there.
And so, Howard, let me add in here. Your brother lives on the East Coast, doesn't he?
No, he lives in, okay, so we all grew up in New York. My parents moved to Florida. My brother is in LA, I'm here, but they also more and more came out to LA. So they had an apartment in LA near him. Oh. So he had that added, even though I went down there 1 to 3 times a month, he was there. So it's hard to ignore. It's harder to separate it. I could separate it a little, even though I was on the phone all the time. So he was in LA near them.
Okay. So, yeah. I mean, so you were traveling. Were you traveling back and forth from San Francisco to LA to be there for them?
Yes. And to Florida. We would take them to Florida because they still wanted to go there. But when the pandemic hit, I spent May of 2020 in LA, which was interesting to see the world operate during a pandemic. And let me tell you, there was no traffic in LA, which was really nice. But yeah, because they were there, my brother needed the help and we had stopped the caregivers and we had to get them back. But there was that month where I was traveling. Then after that, of course, I went down 1 to 3 times a month. He wasn't cross country.
Exactly, yeah. And your parents were both just getting old? Is that what that was? None of them had any type of cognitive issue?
My mother did. So my father broke his hip at 94, and 90% of people in their 90s die within a year. He lasted 5 years. He was sharp. My mom was an athlete. She's in the Basketball Hall of Fame for Brooklyn College. She played tennis and she played till about 80. So it was hard for, she had sciatica and stenosis and then macular degeneration and the shots didn't work. And she had dementia. I think it was progressing, but she always knew who we were. She just repeated herself a lot. And then there was a few things that would come up. No kind of strokes or any types of cancer. We were very blessed that way. My father got a pacemaker and I was down there. Somehow he actually sends the results to the doctor via your phone. He figured out how to do that at age 98. And I was on a call with him to the doctor. I think it was a Zoom type of call. And he asked how long, he's 98. He asked the doctor, how long will the battery last? And she looked, she goes, about 7 more years. And he said, and what do we do after that?
You know, Howard, some people find caregiving overwhelming.
Yes.
How does one find levity in caring for people or caring for their loved ones?
Are they full-time or are they not? I mean, you don't have to answer. Do they want to be doing this or are they stuck doing this? Even if they're stuck, if they accepted that they're doing this, how do they make the most of it? And this reflects to how have they done that in other aspects of their lives. I think the worst of us can come up in these situations and also the best of us can come up. And there'll be things I wish I had done. Patience is not a virtue that we have on our family as well. And I wish there were times where I could be a bit more patient. So everyone is going to be different. How well do you get along with them and your siblings? So levity with that is really, where can you be grateful that day? Where can you feel accepting? Those could be forms of levity. Again, it may not be outright humor, although humor can help. And not necessarily you having the humor, but my mother couldn't see, but my brother, we'd go over, she would crack up at any Don Rickles comedy routine. Didn't matter what she just listened and she would start cracking up. So that wasn't necessarily levity for us. It was levity for her, right? And the last time I took her to the doctor, it was a couple of months before she passed, and she didn't really want to live anymore. We came out of the doctor and she said, I think I'm depressed. And by the way, I have to mention, she had terrible stomach issues as well with everything else. She said, I think I'm depressed. And I said, Ma, of course it would make sense that you're depressed. Look at all the shit that's happened to you since Dad died. And she just looked at me with sincerity and said, if I could just shit. I cracked up like you're laughing. She had been so sincere about what she said, but the fact that I cracked up jumped to her and she started laughing. So that's some of the ways that when I took things really seriously and got on top of them, it got tense. When you kept it lighter, it was a little bit lighter. I want to give credit, and I can't remember his name, the guy who wrote the book Being Mortal. There's a book, it's in the library, but it's a history of home care, nursing homes and different assisted livings. But also, he mentions in the book that as people get older, sometimes the only thing they have left are their decisions. So they'll make their decisions whether it's good for them or not. And the reason I bring that up is because I fought them. After my dad broke his hip, and when it was June, they decided they're going back to Florida in November. How, right? And I tried logic. I pleaded. My brother did it as well. And then when I read that, I thought, okay, what am I arguing for? How is that helping me? There's no levity for me on that, right? And so there's this tension. So the next day I said to my mother, okay, what day do you want to go? I'm going with you. Make sure you get settled in. And of course she's like, what's the trick here? And it's like, there was no trick. So all those kind of ways, and it's in the moment. I don't think you could plan it, Carmen. Don't think that could happen.
So tell me, how was it, Howard, that you and maybe your brother were able to address aging, health, and living a comfortable life for the remaining of their life? How were you able to talk to your parents about that?
What's interesting is I remember slightly before that, I was hanging out with them and they look at me and go, how does it feel hanging out with old people? And of course, in reflection, they weren't old. Even though my father was in his late 80s, wasn't old then. You don't say those things when you're really old because they stopped saying those. Part of it is, are they in pain, right? You don't want people to be in pain. And what is their comfort level at that point? It got to when both of them were alive, I would call up and go, what'd you do this morning? And sometimes the answer was, I got up and had breakfast. And I learned, okay, that they're serious and that's fine. I don't know I think I'd feel guilty if that's all I did. I feel like it's like, oh my God, I have so much more to do. In some ways, it's kind of pleasant that they're fulfilled by just doing that. So their sense of comfort and what they'll do is going to depend. Like they wanted to have their meals. And so there's someone who came in who made their meals. That was bigger for them. Just the ability to, their world was where they were living. And if they had to go to the doctor. And then they did a lot of walking when they lived in a place where they could go outside and walk. They took care of that sometimes. And we just made sure they were doing those things. And I would say that we never got into where we felt they were doing harm. Although my father refused to use a walker or a cane, even though he fell a lot. This is before he broke his. And I was with him at the doctor and he told the doctor, I don't fall, I stumble. Like there was a difference. In his mind, there was a difference. He confessed to me he should use something, but he doesn't. Then a few weeks later, he broke his hip. So your question was, how do you keep them comfortable? Well, when that was happening, that's when it started, right? I had to find who's going to come and help with Dad when he gets back. What kind of help is there? And in his case, I don't know how he did this. I went there and he was out of it today because they call it narco, right? But that was Vicodin back when I had to use it, and thought we can't have, his mind is everything. So I said to them, you can't give him this stuff. And the next day when my mother and I went to see him, we said, how are you? He goes, well, better than yesterday. So I went, oof. But he had to have been in a lot of pain because we didn't give him that pain pill. He didn't remember the pain after a while, but it was like you have to measure what's most important. And obviously, Jay was in severe. Well, with my mother at the end, we said, give her the morphine. She was on hospice, but she hadn't used morphine, but she had broken her hip. Ironically, my father, not the athlete, lives 5 years after breaking his hip. My mother dies within 48 hours of breaking her hip, which was a blessing. But there's different ways to help with their care and keeping them.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I asked that is because, like you said, a lot of people they don't call themselves old anymore. And some of them might be reluctant to use tools that we need in order to ambulate, a walker, a cane, or
Hearing
a bench to
aids.
sit down. Yeah, or hearing aids, or a bench to sit down while you're in the kitchen, maybe prepping your meals and stuff. I think that our parents have a hard time accepting that these tools are there to make life easier. And so that's why I was wondering, how did you and your brother encourage your parents to use these tools without offending them?
Well, I'm not how successful we're with that. And I'm wondering what I'll do. What will you do? I actually went to get a hearing test and it was fine. When my father broke his hip, he accepted a lot of help after that. But you don't want to have to break your hip to do that. But that's what happened in his case. I think for them, what's interesting, I grew up to be independent. They were very independent. My mother was an only child. Her parents were in the deaf community. They were deaf and hard of hearing. So she grew up very much that way. My father had 2 older sisters who doted on him. My father was very stubborn. And I just sometimes didn't have patience. And he refused to come back from Florida when the pandemic started. He said, the cases are worse in California than in Florida. And I said, yeah, but that's going to change. And I stopped pleading with him. My brother didn't. And then it was a friend dying, not of COVID, but of something else, that got him to think, maybe I should be near my sons. So I think it was something like that. They both stopped driving on their own at different times because their eyesights were going, so that scared them. So in our case, they got scared of certain things and they stopped doing it. My mother, after my father passed, she wanted to call 911 sometimes. Like she said, she asked me, can I call 911 because I need an enema? And no, that's what you have the caregiver. They're in the other room or they will be there soon. So we just gave those suggestions. And I think as they got older, my mother didn't cook at the end. She had the meals there. They had the laundry. We were lucky that we could have people in the house. That's a whole nother topic, Carmen, the financial aspects of all of this. And if we had to go on for a long time with 24-hour care, I don't know what it would have happened, but we only had 24-hour care for a few months.
Were your parents living in an assisted living facility or were they at home with somebody coming during the day?
They were at home. And at the end, there was 24-hour help. And then interesting thing that I didn't know, pass on, is I mentioned it in the book. My brother said, I didn't know that dementia qualifies you for hospice. I had no idea because my mother wasn't that far along with it, but she got hospice and she only lasted a few months on it. I thought she'd be the longest person ever on hospice because I didn't see her going that fast. So they came in at different times, but that's separate than you having people come in and helping do whatever they need to do to help clean and cook and if they need help in the bathroom and things like that. Mm-hmm. So they came to them. My father would have been willing to go to an assisted living place. My mother would rather die, so she did. She saw it differently. And quite honestly, as she got where she couldn't see, those places are huge. And so they were intimidating for her. Yeah. We took her to a few, but she didn't. It would have been very tough to get her out of that place where she in the apartment.
Yeah. And so it sounds like your mom was in palliative care and then slowly migrated over to what most people call hospice, where they just keep them comfortable on their way out.
No, that's my point. She wasn't on her way out. When she got the hospice, it's a big agency, which there's pros and cons. They didn't even go to evaluate her. We said she had dementia and she was already in the system. I wasn't there, but my brother went and he said it was just a formality. And she got medical devices and things for free. You could get a social worker could come by. Actually, she got a massage. Some of them were for free. And a nurse that comes by with some medications. All those things were for free, but they encouraged her, just live your life. And she did for a while. She'd go walking still and all that. So it wasn't anything like that. She wasn't in, quote, dying mode until 48 hours before she passed.
Mm.
So that's why about hospice, it was very interesting to me. I didn't know because I thought it means you're on your way out.
Mhm.
And then I learned that there are people in hospice who've been there for years and years. Here's an interesting question that I'm asking. I don't know the answer. If you have 5 to 10 years left, how do you create the best version of yourself during that time when you're limited from what you had?
I would say living every day like it was your last one or to the best day that you could possibly make it.
And there's simpler things that could possibly do that. I knew something was wrong when she wouldn't go for walks because I never had an issue with her falling. Well, she fell at the end, but I never had an issue with her falling. And I would tell her, Ma, you're strong. She was. So I think a lot of it, living your best day comes from how did you do that before? How do you do that in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s? And then getting back to where levity comes into play and how do you talk to yourself? Because I don't know, Carmen, what do you think? Are there a lot of, I don't know how many people think of or naturally have this sense of a lighthearted outlook or use humor. I'm not sure what percentage. I never looked that up.
I don't know, but I can tell you, I think that percentage is very small.
So then to ask how to use levity, they wouldn't know because if they associate it with humor. So I really think it comes down to self-talk. It comes down to questions. And okay, so this is over 10 years ago, more than that. I worked part-time. Do you know Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker? Yep. I was a part-time coach for his business. And he has a lot of tools he ripped from other people. But he had something that I used. There were morning power questions that you ask yourself. And some of the questions were, what am I happy about right now? What am I grateful for right now? What am I enjoying right now? And I used these questions when I was in transition with my business and I didn't know what was going on with business. But when I would get up and I'd say, what am I happy about right now? I'd say to myself, I am the foggiest idea. So I would change the question. I'd say, what could I be happy about right now? I said, well, I could be happy that I'm meeting so-and-so later. And I don't know why, Carmen, but I would get happy. So there's different ways to talk to yourself and then, of course, talk to them. By them, meaning the people you're taking care of or see what they want. I had to respect my mother when 2 months after the doctor's appointment, I had gone away and she called me and she was crying. She was in pain and she said, I don't want to live anymore. And I just listened. I'm not going to try to change that. There was nothing more I could say there. And that was her. She was ready. She was ready. So she didn't last that much longer. So where's the levity in that? Well, I have one. In the midst of that time, she had the TCM channel. She couldn't see, but Jeopardy, where she was a contestant in the 1960s, and TCM, she watched the old movies. She couldn't see it, but she could hear it. We had a DVR. We recorded What's Up, Doc? I don't know if you remember that movie. It's still very funny. I watched it with her, and we were both laughing for almost 90 minutes. This has been those last couple of months, and she woke up happy, saying, a good movie is a good movie. So you're not going to always have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But try to do something that they'll enjoy, and maybe you'll enjoy it because they're enjoying it.
And I commend you for allowing your mom to just say what was on her mind, say what was in her heart, even though those things were very painful to you, because nobody wants to have their parents say, I wish I could die right now.
Well, what was interesting about that is there's a lot of times I didn't listen to all she said because she came from a different place. My brother said after my father passed, no wonder Dad didn't want hearing aid. And my mother, I say this with love, but I remember one Thanksgiving. And again, what I said earlier, it's a gradual shift. I was down there the week of Thanksgiving and it was a little cold in LA. She was trying to take a nap. So I put an extra blanket over her and she said, thank you. And then she sighed and went, who's going to fold it? But that's what I was used to, right? That's what I was used to. After a long drive, I came in and she said, Howard, those shorts are hideous. And I said, I thought you can't see. And she said, Howard, you don't have to see to see how hideous those shorts. And that's that was my mom, right? And so that one I could push back on when it was something that was this raw and real. Yeah. And I think all the things that happened, nothing could prepare you for that moment. But I remember where I was sitting when I got that call. So that was not characteristic of her to do that.
Do you think that your parents instilled levity into yours and your brother's life growing up? Because you said that there was always the laughter, because it was preparing you for these days, the day you lost your dad, the day you lost your mom.
Well, it's first, the answer is 100%. That's how we grew up. But it is interesting you say that. If I had known, because I saw my mom die, my brother was on the East Coast and I wasn't expecting that. How would I go about life? I knew that, or if she knew that, but I realized that's not what life's about anyway. It was a profound moment. But they instilled levity because there was laughter. And I know not every house has laughter, but people do get laughter from books or television or movies. And you have that perspective. The ability to laugh is very powerful, or the ability to at least smile. So I wish I had a PowerPoint. You do these 3 steps. I do say changing how you speak to yourself will help. But it's not easy. Carmen, it takes a second to change. It can take years to get there.
Very true.
So yeah, 100%. The humor, this was from a friend's brother put together. I don't know if you've heard of this. There's a game that people do. It's a death game, death poll. You think of what's famous people are going to die in the next year. You have to put your results in by midnight of the year prior. And you're looking at me. And it's based on 120, I think, or 125. So the younger they are, the more points you get. And everyone puts in $10. It's a morbid game. I loved it because you're making fun of something that's going to have the last laugh, right? It's something, and it was interesting. People expressed horror to me, but then when someone died, they would text me or whatever. Did you pick that person? But my father was like, oh boy, he just couldn't believe I was doing that. And I said, Dad, don't worry. You can't be on the list when you're not famous. I won't get enough points with you anyway. And I think they didn't have that, but that's my humor, my coping mechanisms, right? And it came from them. Whether they thought that one was too perverse or not, it came from them.
And you know, Howard, when I first heard about your book and I heard about you, I wanted to have you on the show because I experienced something difficult in my life. And here I am, I'm reading about you and I'm like, wow, he is smiling and he's seeing the blessing. And unfortunately, my mother remarried and the man that she married ended up getting esophageal cancer. And so I took him to Hollywood to go have his esophagus removed, have the cancer removed. Once they said everything was gone, we did our happy dance. 6 months later, we found out the dance is over. And so I cared for him. I helped care for him between myself and my brother until he gave his last breath here at UC Davis. In fact, I became so desperate. I brought them from the Central Valley up here to my home in Sacramento, took him to UC Davis to see if maybe we could get him in some type of experimental program to save his life because he was only either 52 or 54 years old. And I was actually in the room when he gave his last breath. I prayed over him like 10, 12 hours before. And I said, please, God, take this broken body. Take your son with you. Give him the body that you promised he would have. And I remember my stepfather gave me the most evilest look because I think he felt like I gave up on the fight. But it was because realization kicked in. And I saw that here he was like 110 pounds. He was a man, but he was 110 pounds. He wasn't eating. He was eating through they had like a tube that they would feed him through. And so it was horrible. And I remember when he gave his last breath, it took me years and years to stop crying when I talk about it. Now I'm surprised that I'm not crying because every time I talk about it, I always cry. And so when I heard about you, I'm like, oh my goodness, here's Howard. These were his biological parents. And he had humor, he took care of them, and he's smiling.
Yeah. I mean, I grieve. I still can't believe they're gone. Right. And there's moments. I had a tennis match where I won, and I was like, I would have told my mom about it, and I forgot for a second. And when I saw her go, I don't know, I'm very grateful I got to see that, but it was a hard moment. I wasn't necessarily expecting it. I was very naive. She was breathing heavy, whatever it was. So yes, I'm smiling. I go back to smiling, and yes, I got it from them, because I do think, and it's been 2 years. What year? Yeah, 2 years, something like that, a little over 2 years. But I still feel it. I could feel that. I move on. It's a testament to them. What would they want? And it doesn't matter that they were biological. I think how cool it is that you felt that way about he was your dad, whether it was a stepfather, he was your dad. Someone I know who was sort of surprised how hard it hit me because they were much older. That's kind of, I would like, but then someone else said to me, my parents died younger. I imagine it might be harder when they're older because you had them around so much. And there's no right or wrong with that. My brother said, I felt like I was kicked out of the nest, even though we've been out of the nest for, a long time. So yeah, I'm smiling, but that's part of my healing.
Yeah. And my biological father passed away in 2019. And there are days, Howard, I still forget that he's gone.
Yeah.
Some things happen in my life and I'm like, I want to call Dad. And I'm like, what are you thinking? Dad's gone. He's been gone since 2019.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're saying that, because I don't think it never goes away. It shouldn't go away. These are people who have meant a lot to, and they've had impact on us. And we're lucky that we had positive influences from them. And so I feel grateful for that. And that makes me smile as well. It's not like I'm always an optimistic person. There's Myers-Briggs, which does personality, but I'm more about the DISC behavioral assessment because you could use that in corporate America. And so I don't know if you know it, but I'm a DI, which is dominant influential. And one of the conflicts about that is you could see the glass half empty and half full at the exact same second. But that is where the levity comes in. My mom died at 1 a.m. I hadn't slept in 2 days, so that was the third day I didn't sleep. And that day, all family was on the East Coast, but I had to bring something to the funeral place, which I was familiar with because I had just been there less than a year and a half. And I was really tired about 6 o'clock at night, and I was hungry, sort of. And there was this mushroom barley soup that my mother always loved from someplace. And I just had it, and I just went, Ma, you're right. This is really good. But yeah, I was in shock. You have to be. I think that you're grieving, that's huge. I would be concerned if I didn't grieve or keep grieving. But there's no reason you can't smile.
Howard, what are practical ways that people can begin to practice levity? Those people that are taking care of their parents right now, or maybe see themselves that in a year or so, I might have to help my parents start making healthy decisions about their future.
Well, for one thing, are the parents making those decisions right now? I do have a friend right now who asked me about that. And I said, well, one of the things is you want to look at their finances and how are they doing it? And where is the money? Is it in, because if they have too much money, then they can't get certain benefits. And so who can they give the money to? Those kind of conversations you might want to have. You might want to talk with siblings, and that can be challenging where the conflict, or you have an agreement. Like if you live somewhere else and one of the siblings lives near them, they have, I would say, the final say. My brother would laugh because I don't think I always gave it so. But because they're right there in that moment. So that would be a form of levity to talk about those. Sometimes parents, do they want assisted living, or they're the ones who won't give up driving, and then you're going to have to, that could be hard with the levity issue, because I don't know where the lightness on that one could come in. I know my mother constantly saw my father after he passed. And I think a lot of that was just grief and part of that was dementia. But one of the ways I had levity with that, I said, "How did he look?" And she would laugh. So it is just one of the things you said, it's keeping conversation open and seeing what services can be used. Doing that and not hiding it from them either. Saying, "Wait, you're not there. I'm just looking at services." Or what have you looked at? I have a friend who's going through that with his mom and stepfather, and they're living too big of a house and they haven't left yet, but they're having some conversations about that. And sometimes for many of the decisions we made is right in that moment because they hadn't been made before. And I think that's what does happen. But any free thought you can do might help make it lighter. That's the word I'll use. Make it lighter. It's still heavy, but make it lighter.
Here's another question.
Sure.
Like you had mentioned that sometimes if one sibling lives closer to the parents, it can create, maybe they have more responsibility, or maybe they feel like I have too much responsibility.
Yeah.
You need to help me. How do you keep peace between the siblings? Like you and your brother. Fortunately, it was just the two of you guys because you were in San Francisco and he's in Southern
LA.
California
Yeah.
or LA.
Well, as I said, we were fighting for quite, and we didn't even know for the month that we were fighting that my mother was aware of it and the caregivers were because they couldn't, communicate. So no, there was a lot of tension there. So how do you keep peace? At that time, my brother said to me when he'd call me, "How come I'm hesitant when I pick up the phone? Because I think they give me bad news," right? And he said, "Fair enough." So you might have issues that pop up because you don't agree. So you try to separate some responsibilities. And we did. Well, but I overstepped, if he'll listen to this. His point was if something was wrong with one of the home care aides who came, he's going to have to react because I'm up here. He has to go there. Now, though, I was in charge of the agency. So it's kind of like, was I working for my brother? There was that kind of conflict there. Then, of course, if someone's job or other responsibilities is busier, how do you deal with that? And I know someone right now, and she has a lot of siblings, but she's the one who's primarily taking care of her mom, but she wants to. Sometimes she gets resentful, but then she has to remind herself, this is what I wanted to do.
And how does one do that? How do you snap out of it and say, this is what I wanted to do? Because it is overwhelming.
Well, she could just ask me and I'll remind her. But it's actually, I'm just being funny right here, but it's talking it out loud that she'll realize this is what she wanted. This is what she chose. And see how they've contributed. There's still going to be resentment. One of the things, the biggest compliment I got is in my book. My brother read it. He goes, "I know I didn't take for granted what you did, even though I thought you should do it, but I didn't know how much you did." I thought, well, my work for me, as far as that was, I'm very glad he said that. And that wasn't my intent of writing the book. We all have our own worlds we live in. And when we're stressed, how do you snap out of it? So Carmen, we could change the question. It doesn't have to be about caregiving. If you're too involved with anything, how do you step out of that? Mm-hmm. But it does add, particularly when you're dealing with family. And if you have a lot of siblings and you don't get along, that could be.
Howard, what did you use to help keep you balanced? What tools did you use to help you get refreshed? Because I know snapping out, laughing, all that stuff to find levity can work to a certain extent.
Yes.
But what did you use?
I work out. So my dad died. It was late Saturday night, midnight on the last day of the month. If you waited 20 minutes, we would have gotten the pension for one more month. But they said his body was not doing well, so gotten there late. On Monday morning, I got up early and went to the gym. I was like crying on the trip. But I think when I reflect, so interesting. Thank you for that question, Carmen, because I don't know what got me, but when I was in my 20s, I decided I always need to stay in shape. So that really, if I had to pick one thing, that would be one thing where I continue to do that in some aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you could give advice to your younger self when you began your journey, what advice would you give?
Well, But actually, I'm going to have a two-part answer for that one because my advice now is different. But I always say, if my older self give it young, it would be 3 pieces of advice and it's only 9 words. One of them is stretch. One of them is buy real estate. And the other is stairs. I mean, that you can go, but you have to put sunscreen on that. It's maybe less words. But a few weeks before my father passed at age 99, my brother called. We spoke to our parents a lot, but he would talk to my father about work. A stressful job. He's a lawyer. And he was talking for a while. And as my brother finished, my father said to him, Andy, it'll work out. And if it doesn't work out, it worked out. And my brother didn't tell me that till after he passed, which was like just a few weeks later. We both said, well, he didn't necessarily live his life that way, but this is what he gave us. And that's the quote in the front of my book. And I think about that every day when you're going through stuff. And other people have adapted that too. Someone I know was selling her business now. She goes, it'll work out. If it doesn't work out, it worked out. That's my advice now. It'll work out. And if it doesn't work out, it worked out.
Howard, from the conversation that we had today, what is it that you would want those sandwich generation or midlifers that are actively in the trenches right now? They're walking this journey. They're taking care of their parents or parent or a loved one.
Yeah.
What do you want them to hold close to their heart and remember from this conversation?
Well, their journey of doing this is going to end. And how do they want to be while they're in the journey? Because it could go on for a while. There are going to be ups and downs. But how do you want to be in the moments? And how do you want to help them? So that's what I want them to remember, because it will end. And when you look back, yes, you might have some regrets, but what are the good stuff? If you allow it, there's good stuff through the journey as well.
There it certainly is. Howard, where can people learn more about you? Purchase your book.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I have a website, and it's fulcrumpointpartners.com. And you go / and go best me, and it'll come up with a link to your podcast as well. And you can purchase the book from there. And also look at, if whoever's listening here and they want some more about leadership and management tools that relate to Levity. I'm thrilled, Carmen, because the fact that I can talk about my parents and also make a difference in work worlds as well with the skills that I have used, what an opportunity that is that could be there. So that's how they could learn about me. Yeah.
Great. Howard, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your heavy story, but with such a bright, beautiful outcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So what do you do after the battery runs out? According to Howard's dad, and now maybe according to us, you laugh, you love, and you trust that it'll all work out. And if it doesn't work out, it worked out. Want more of Howard's stories and strategies? Swing by createthebestme.com/EP128 for his book, his speaking schedule, and dive deeper into using Levity as your secret power. And don't wander too far. Another fresh episode drops next week, crafted just for you. Until then, keep dreaming big, take care of yourself, and remember, you are beautiful, strong, and capable of creating the best version of yourself. Thank you for watching. Catch you next week. Bye for now.